Welcome everyone to TeaCup Philosophy, the place where we can have a virtual tea party and just discuss lots of life issues, ethics, and mysteries. Today I'm going to ask a very important question, and you may wonder what I'm rambling on about today, but this question is linked to a thought experiment. The question is, would you pull the lever? Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about and you do not understand what a thought experiment is, I'm going to briefly discuss that. But when I've done that, we're going to go into some more bigger discussions and we're going to link it to some debates of today. And we're going to look at some perspectives of what you may do in a particular thought experiment. And we're going to look at ethics for this. So we're going to look at an ethical thought experiment. So, what is a thought experiment? A thought experiment is not just an excuse that philosophers have come up with to sit around drinking coffee all day. Or maybe they do. There's no harm in that. I have this big burning question about why do some tea brands insist you use 2 tea bags instead of 1? For me, it's an ethical thing. There's no need for it, but they do it anyway. And I don't know if it's to make more money out of us by going through our tea bags quicker, or if it's the fact that they firmly believe that 1 tea bag is enough. Now, I'm not naming names here, but when you know about tea, you know. And I'm just saying that if you need to use 2 tea bags, then what are they even doing with this? Credit where credit is due. Yorkshire tea bag is built for purpose. So it's 1 bag, a solid brew, and there's no faffing about, and it's absolute perfection. That is my opinion. If you know, you know. Anyway, we're going to be speaking of things that look simple on the surface but get complicated very quickly. So today's episode is about those thought experiments that I'm going to be discussing now. So it's basically a way of running a mental scenario to test your principles. It's like a stress test for your morals or your worldview and your perspectives. And why is a thought experiment useful? And I believe, and many philosophers believe, that this is useful because life is really, really messy. You've not just got emotions, you've got the politics side of things, you've got social pressures, you've got your friends, your families, your mum, whoever telling you one thing, and then you've got the likes of Twitter telling you another. A thought experiment strips all that noise away. It gives you a neat little imaginary situation where you can't wriggle out and you've got to decide. It enables you to really look at what you actually believe. And the one way we're looking at this today, in terms of a thought experiment, is a really famous one, and it's about modern ethics, and it's called the trolley problem. Now, before we go into this, I want you to really, sit back in your cozy chair and really think about imagining this in your mind's eye. Okay? So, you're standing behind a railway track, just minding your own business. Maybe you're having a lunchtime brew. But suddenly, you hear a screech of metal. A runaway trolley is charging down the track. On the line ahead, there are 5 workers who are totally oblivious. There's no warning, nothing, and the trolley will hit them in about 10 seconds. But you are in the unique spot. You're in the right place at the right time. Right next to you is a lever, and if you pull it, this trolley switches tracks, and brilliant, it means the 5 workers live. Except on the side track, there's 1 worker, which means if you don't pull the lever, The trolley will keep running down onto one track where there's 5 workers. If you pull the lever, you're going to hit the 1 worker. So here's your dilemma. What would you do? Do you do nothing and 5 people die? Or do you pull a lever and 1 person dies instead? Now, to some, this might seem like a very obvious choice. You save 5 people instead of 1. But there's a lot of things to consider in this. And when we go through this, you'll see that it's a brutal choice. And no, you can't shout before anybody jumps in and says you can call the police, or you can shout out loud for someone to help you. You can't fly in like a superhero. In this scenario, it's just you, a lever, and a very awkward moral crisis. So, what would philosophers do with this? Well, of course, they would argue a lot. Let's invite a few voices to our virtual tea table. And when I say voices, I mean some perspectives. And let's see what they would have to say. Okay, so first of all, we're going to talk about a utilitarianism perspective from Bentham and Mill. Okay, so Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill are utilitarians. We've spoke about this before. So basically, the accountants of happiness. So they believe that the ultimate goal is for people to be happy. So when they're looking at this thought experiment, their view would probably be that you should absolutely pull the lever. Why? Because morality is about consequences, and you maximise happiness and minimise suffering. So 1 death is tragic, of course it is, but 5 deaths is worse. So it's almost like a numbers game, which is why we use the word accountant in the beginning of this sentence. So you save 5 people and you sacrifice 1. So in this sense, utilitarianism feels very logical, very clean. It's very easy to decide on situations because you've almost got a framework. But the second you start imagining who that 1 person is, it starts to feel less tidy. And this is what I really need you to think about. So when you look at the utilitarian aspect from this point of view, in terms of a numbers game, it seems very logical. But start thinking about who these numbers are, and the water becomes a little bit more muddy. So let's jump on to Kant and deontology. So here you have Immanuel Kant, and sorry, the child in me grins when I say that word because I'm always worried I'm going to say it wrong. That's so childish. I do apologise. And he not here for utilitarian maths. Okay, sorry, I just got like blindsided by the name then and my childishness. So Immanuel Kant will not be here for utilitarian maths. So he's got rules, different sets of rules, and they're very strict. So he will probably say, don't you dare pull that lever. Why would he say that? Because he believes that morality, or believed that morality isn't about the outcome, it's about the principle. And one of the big ones is this: you should never treat people as a means to an end. And what that means is if you pull the lever, you're basically using that 1 person as a tool to save the others. And that, in Kant's world, is a massive no-go. So for Kant, is almost like saying you have to let fate do its thing. You're not guilty of murder if you don't interfere. So if you don't get involved with something, then you can't be culpable for it. But the moment you act, that is the moment you cross the moral line. And Kant would be terrible in any action in this way, because it's almost like saying stand back and let anybody get on with anything. Don't get involved, then you've got no responsibility. So the next one I want to come on to is Aristotle. So Aristotle is all about virtue ethics, sorry. So when you look at Aristotle, he's not interested in rules or spreadsheets. So he's not looking at a numbers game. He's not looking at the responsibility element of it. His thing is about what sort of person you are. So he's looking at the individual aspect of you and your morality yourself and what makes you a good person, I should imagine. And virtual ethics says morality isn't about ticking boxes. So it's more qualitative type of stuff. It's about developing character. So in this scenario, Aristotle would ask, what would a virtuous person do? So what would you do as a good person? And he would use compassion and courage as a move to pull the lever. Or he would use that to not pull a lever. So it's almost like saying it depends where you are. So if you pull a lever and you don't believe in God, you're doing that as a compassion to 5 people, let's say. But in the same breath, you could say or think it's not your place to play God. So you don't pull the lever. And this is tricky when it comes to virtue ethics because it doesn't give you a real answer. What it does is sort of hands you a mirror and it says, look at yourself and see what you think is the right thing to do. And if you do the right thing, then it doesn't matter what the consequences are because you believe you are good and you have done a good thing. So when we look at adding complications to these whole ethics, virtues and different elements of perspectives, we can come to some sort of I don't know, added conclusions. Okay. So we know that there's various different perspectives and various different ways of looking at thought experiments. So we know it's not just a case of going up and pulling the lever to save 5 people, let's say. There's a whole range of different things to look at. And just when you look at this and you think you've sort of got it in your head, philosophy may turn back to you and say, oh, you're feeling comfortable. Let's just add another dimension to this. What if that person isn't a stranger? Okay, so maybe let's look at the fact that you are a utilitarian and you are doing this for the happiness of the good, the greater good. Okay, so what if one person isn't a stranger? What if it's your best friend or your grandma or, brace yourself, what if it's you on the sidetrack? So would you sacrifice yourself, your friend, your grandma for the greater good of the world? Now, the utilitarian math looks a bit dodgy at this point, and Kant's rules may feel even harsher because what they would be saying then is that you can't pick happiness, genuine happiness. Well, you could pick genuine, like the greater good of happiness over what's relevant to you, what's a good thing, but it's going to be very hard to do so because that's when emotions get involved and that's a problem in itself. Now, Kant can be a little bit harsher because when you're looking at his involvement, he's saying don't get involved. You're not God, don't play God, leave it, stand back. But why would he stand back, or would he stand back, sorry, not why, would he stand back if he could save somebody he truly loves? And this is where you could sort of look at the Aristotle point of view and look at whether you're a good person or not. And you could sort of like play both cards with that. Because as long as you think you're doing a good thing, then it doesn't really matter. And I suppose you could say it's not a good thing if you save, your grandma over these 5 people. Or you probably could say it is a good thing because that person is a good person. There's all sorts of things you can think about in this thought experiment, but the point of the experiment itself is to really get you stretching your thoughts and your opinions and to understand how you would behave in a situation like this. Not that this would come up every day as the trolley problem, but how you would sort of behave and respond to a situation like this, because it's not something that would happen every day. But it is something that you could apply onto certain situations that are relevant to you. And I'm going to come on to some sort of modern day situations where these thought experiments might actually help in an ethics point of view. Now, just to go back to the thought experiment, you can use them in different parts of philosophy. So, not just ethics, you can look at other parts like knowledge, and you can look at other parts like metaphysics, for example. But today we're just looking at ethics because I think it's just really interesting to look at the ethical question and the trolley problem. Okay. So now we've looked at that and we've sort of gone over it and we looked at some of the key principles. We're going to be looking more now about how we can tie this into modern day. And one of the things that really interests me, and I'm going a little bit off script now just to look at some of the things that I've found fascinating of late. One of the things that really interests me is the media. Okay, so here is my thought experiment for you to consider. And this thought experiment is not really a hypothetical one, so it is one that's almost sort of happening. So you've got a situation in America where you've got an A-lister, or some may argue it's not an A-lister actress, and you have a sort of a director who's not well known as much, and you can look this up to look at the lawsuits and various other things that are happening. And I warn you, if you go down that rabbit hole, it is absolutely fascinating, but it is a rabbit hole, and there's lots of coverage around this to get the finer detail. But the situation is you've got a well-known actress and you've got a not so well-known director who are in a lawsuit regarding the allegation of sexual harassment from the director to the actress on set. He's denied it. She's pursuing this. And not only pursuing that, but she's saying that he smeared her through a retaliation campaign for speaking out. So there's a big lawsuit going on. And now what this has done is uncovered something far bigger, a far bigger discussion into free speech. And the reason I want to use this is for an example of a thought experiment is because in the UK, where I'm based, we don't have the privileges of free speech like they have in America. So in England, in the UK, we are not permitted to have as much free speech as America. So when you look at the coverage of all of this, there is a lot of what is speculated as truths and not truths from traditional media sources and content creators. And you could sort of argue that content creators have got more scope to really do more critical thinking. And I find that fascinating that people are allowed to do that in America, to really bring things to the forefront and do their research and their diligence on that. And then you've got traditional media have been over time been great reputational sources of news. You may question that, and you may question the content creators. But my thought experiment for this is something for you to think about, is whether that creates good or evil in the world, and whether this is something that is a utilitarian thing, for example, or is a moral thing, or is something that you really shouldn't be getting involved in. And so the thought experiment would be, if I can put it in a statement, is if you had the ability, if you had the power to create free speech or shut it down, what would you do? And would it be for the greater good of a topic such as, sexual harassment in the workplace? Would it uncover more support in that element? So let's look at that. That is the ethical underlying question. Would free speech in this situation, if you had the power to create opportunities for people to prove their innocence around these situations, if you had the power to do that using free speech, would you do it? So, would you say, for example, pull a lever to let that free speech carry on full force, go ahead and get what we believe as truths out there, maybe, allegedly? Or would you stop the lever and leave all the truth to traditional reputational media outlets? And that's the thought experiment. And I'm not sitting on any side here to say you should pull the lever or you shouldn't. That is down to you to decide. And I've given you three sort of philosophical ways of looking at this. So you could look at the utilitarian aspect. Well, actually, if you go down this route of shutting down free speech, you're letting reputational laws and frameworks and everything we know over, decades of time to actually do the diligence for the greater good. Or are you sort of like saying, well, hang on a minute, it's not really our responsibility to get involved. Just, let everybody else get on with it. Don't get involved, then you can't be guilty or responsible of having any involvement in that. Or would you say that actually this is a moral responsibility? So if people want to get involved, let them do it. Now, that would be part, obviously, of not touching the lever at all as well. But this is something for you to really think about and go more in depth into if you want to, or it's something to just think about in terms of creating your own thought experiment, I suppose. So you can use another example. I'd be really interested to see what you might come up with this, and what sort of rabbit hole you may go down. But remember, this is an ethical question. The trolley problem is an ethical question. So we're looking at the sort of what is right and what is wrong in the world. What is good, what is bad, what makes us do the things we do, and what questions the way that we do the things we do. So the who, the how, and the what of how we behave and how actions have consequences and how it all looks to the world from our own thoughts, opinions, and behaviour. And that's where I'm going to leave it. I want to see what your thoughts are. You may want to add stuff, you may want to question anything I've spoke about. I'm happy to look at this and have some debates on the actual ethics. If, like I say, if you're interested in the lawsuit, there's all sorts of things you can pull out. It's so It's so big, it's such a rabbit hole. There's lots of stuff you can really dive into on that. But as an ethics question, what do you think? And in terms of the trolley problem or even the sort of free speech problem, would you pull a lever on it or would you let it go? Or would you just leave it to everybody else to just sort out themselves and sit back and think, that ain't my responsibility? Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining my virtual tea party, and I hopefully will hear from you soon. Bye for now.